There is a channel called Folding Ideas. The guy who runs the channel has an awesome video going over the editing in Suicide Squad, and it's probably my favorite description of what is wrong with that film. He found my series on H.BOMBERGUY, and he is friends with him, so naturally he did not like it, but he went a step further than just saying that. He said, it's largely unbearable smugness presenting shallow, unimaginative opinions, which is honestly rough to hear from somebody you respect. But then he says this: I skipped to the dude's last video, his own Defense of Dark Souls 2 video. The first 2 minutes are, there are so many weapons to choose from, so many enemies to kill, and it is set before you as a world to conquer by exploration and destruction of your presumed enemies. Imagine being the person who plays Dark Souls 2 and comes out the other end thinking options and conquest are the appropriate foremost descriptors for the game. Okay, people who liked my series are probably aware of what is wrong here, but let's go through it quickly. Folding Ideas was skipping through my videos, not watching more than a handful of minutes at a time, and yet he's making sweeping claims about them. He said it's largely unbearable smugness presenting shallow, unimaginative opinions when he hasn't even watched collectively half of a video of the 14-hour series. This is so embarrassing and just genuinely rude. He skipped to the beginning of the 2 minutes of my last video and judged it as a bad perspective on Dark Souls 2. Had he waited for 5 minutes, he would know that it was a parody. I was making that abundantly clear, that it was essentially a joke, and he took it seriously because he didn't see the reveal just minutes later. How telling is that in terms of his intentions of insulting me, that he screwed it up that badly? He then says that conquest and options for builds are terrible ways to describe this action RPG about clearing areas, killing bosses, and setting up a skill set based on what you prefer. This doesn't make any sense. How do you become so fundamentally wrong? Some other guy actually supports this. This is quite possibly the worst read of Dark Souls stuff I've ever seen. I'm impressed the dude is missing the point by that much. What are you both talking about? I talk about the themes and the story in Dark Souls 2 about 4 minutes after the build diversity in the video. He just didn't watch that part, so he assumes it doesn't exist. On top of that, his fanbase had one consistent complaint about my videos. People kept saying that the whole measured response title doesn't make sense and that 10 hours cannot be considered measured. First of all, measured doesn't mean short, you fools. And secondly, it's in reference to H.BOMBERGUY himself. His response videos are titled that way, and so when I responded to him, I wanted to mirror that. The cherry on the cake of this utter mess is that someone responded to the criticisms of the length and said, I swear there's something up with right-wing gamers and their inability to edit. I'm a right-wing gamer now. What are you talking about? What did my video even cover that was remotely political? I make a point to avoid that side of discussion unless absolutely necessary, and yet I am right-wing? I have to say it was an interesting experience, as I have never had a spotlight from someone that popular, but they missed the mark so fundamentally that I could only read hundreds of negative comments about the work overall from people who hadn't even watched beyond 5 minutes, and that is sad. I gained about 30 subscribers from the person who shared it to Folding Ideas, and a few new fans, so that was cool. And honestly, to the guy who shared my video, you know who you are, and I want to thank you again. Do not feel 1 ounce of guilt for trying to put my videos out there. It's not always going to resonate with people, but the fact is you actually tried to share my perspective, so I really appreciate the effort, thank you. But it doesn't stop there, folks. As time went on, H.BOMBERGUY ignored the existence of my series, but my Star Wars video came out and went viral. This gave a lot of traction to my channel. And so, from what I can tell, H.BOMBERGUY got a couple of tweets about my series, and so he finally gave it a full chance. He watched it right the way through— no, he skipped through it. Nobody wants to watch 9 hours, so they decide to watch random parts of it out of order, because that makes more sense than watching the opening 10 minutes, doesn't it? Harris criticized me for taking him seriously when he said people don't need lock-on to play Monster Hunter. Do you remember that bit, guys? When I said that as a Monster Hunter player, I could tell him that yes, people wanted a lock-on, and it sucks that we didn't have one. And now, they do have one in the new game. So, whoops. Apparently that wasn't a serious argument from him. Apparently he was joking, so I responded by saying that I treated it as a serious argument with full context because it sounded like one. And whether or not it was serious, it was wrong. The fact that I left the quote in context means that my audience can decide for themselves from his cadence and his tone whether or not it was a joke. No harm, no foul. Ultimately, Harris was rather cordial, if not completely condescending at the end. He tweeted out that I clearly put time and effort in and that I'm committed, but I still do it badly. That long-form content to this degree is not the way to go about making videos. Well, now that I've been found by a fan base that actually wants this kind of content, I can definitively say that you're wrong, Harris. and I've had an overwhelming amount of support for my style of content, and I think it's just what YouTube needs. The problem is that everything is already truncated down and sold off each day for views, with barely anyone taking the time to be clear and concise. So I am more than happy to say that I will not be taking your advice. However, I appreciate the sentiment versus the whole mess that Folding Ideas tried and failed to pull. Isn't it ironic that they complain about my videos being too long when they can't catch more than a few minutes out of sequence? Had I made a 10-minute long video, they still wouldn't have gotten the point. After that, a fan of H.BOMBERGUY claimed that he was certain that I was simply mentally unhealthy to have created the series, that I do not possess a happy or healthy mind, when I will confidently claim that my series is more informative than 99% of the rubbish you see on the internet in relation to Dark Souls as a series, so you can take your armchair psychologist perspective and shove it up your arse, mate. And that is what happened with that. I don't like pulling this card, and so, you know, honestly, don't worry about my actual mental health here, guys. I tend to be a brick wall with this sort of thing, but they both picked at my video and myself, insulting it and ridiculing me in front of their massive audiences for misunderstanding the game being discussed and the video created, encouraging others to do the same, which all would have been fine with me had either of them actually watched even a 10-minute stretch of any part of the video. I have to say, I've lost a massive amount of respect for Folding Ideas. His attitude is just petty and childish. As for Harris, I don't expect him to respond well to 10 hours of criticism, but he could have just had an easygoing chat with me about it, or hell, just ignore me instead of doing what he did. Ultimately, I offered to speak to Harris and Folding Ideas several times, but I was denied or ignored at every turn, and judging from this encounter, all I can say is that I think both of them aren't interested in discussion. Anything that is critical of things they love, or critical of themselves, they're just happy to echo chamber it right out, and I suppose it's offensive to try and burst that bubble. Honestly, if I ever get to their level of fame, I hope you guys hold me to a better standard than their fan bases hold them, because this whole thing was embarrassing to read through, as well as really disheartening in terms of, wow, is this what fame does to people? Though it was still neat to see them acknowledge my videos, and at the very least I gained some fans from the interaction too.